mean, we can say all day long, oh yeah, it's going to protect your business and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, you sound like a broken record. So what are some steps that you take to educate your clients about the needs for the services that you're providing?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's a matter of talking to them about what the risk is on a practical level. So, if we're talking about a trademark and this is the name of your business, sometimes the question is, how would you feel if you see your name on somebody else's website? Are you okay with that? Would you be willing to change it? Is it not a big deal for you just to kind of change some code on your website and just swap it out? Or is that going to be traumatic to your business? If it's going to be traumatic to your business, we got to get that protected now. It's talking about, the big thing these days are kind of like the online protection mechanisms that are available through sites like Amazon or social media sites where you have to be able to take it down. So the question is, what would you do if you saw somebody with a Facebook page that was using your mark, advertising similar services? Would that, is that going to be troubling to you? Is that going to be a problem? Or are you focused more on kind of direct personal interaction? If it's going to be a problem, here's how you go about protecting it, and here's what those steps might look like. It's going to be a lot easier if you have that registration in place.
Absolutely. Because with the DMCA takedown that you're kind of referring to, one party can say, this is mine. The DMCA, they'll take it down. But then if the other party's like, no, this is mine, they'll put it back up. They're not the judge or the jury of that particular content or trademark or whatever you're trying to get down. So the best way to prove it is through a registration. And so what I really wanted to talk about is a little bit about that. And what is your tips if someone is considering today, if a listener is like, oh, I don't know if I should trademark, what are some of your top tips on helping them figure that out?
Yeah, so as far as, I think it's important to understand that you're going to have some rights based off of just your use of it. So, that's always going to be the balance. Do I have enough protection through my common law trademark rights, or do I need to get a federal registration? And so for your listeners, and as you know, common law trademark rights are going to be limited to the geographic area in which you've used the mark. So if you're primarily a local company, you don't really have ambitions to kind of move out of this limited geographic area, you might be okay with your common law rights. But if you really have ambitions to move into other markets, you have ambitions to be a nationwide company, you really got to get that registration done as quickly as possible so that you hold your place in line and get your protection so that somebody can't kind of come in later and trump what you've built. The other conversation I have a lot, especially with regard to trademarks, is they come to me and they say, I want to register the name of my company and my logo and all of these things. I usually try to help them prioritize what's going to be the most important. What is your primary bring out to your customers as? My recommendation is generally to file for what's called a Standard Characters Trademark Application for that primary brand. And a Standard Characters Application provides the broadest protection for the literal element within that mark. Think about a big name for brand like Coca-Cola. So you have the word Coca-Cola, and then you have the fancy kind of white script font that we're all familiar with. And then you have some of their logos where you have Coca-Cola on a red stamp or on a bottle or such. So what I'm saying when I say a standard characters mark, get the words Coca-Cola registered as a standard characters, because that's going to protect you if you use it in typed font. It'll protect you if you use it with a logo, if you use it with different fonts. It allows you to change your logo down the road. After you've gotten that protection, really you're allowed to get incremental protection for your design or your logo. But, if you're prioritizing, go for that broadest protection possible. And then kind of the third level protection, what are your taglines? How long do you intend to use that tagline? Is it something that you'll use for a few years, for a month? Is it something that's going to be the identity of your company for the next 10 years? If it's going to be your identity for a long time, get that registration. If you plan on changing it out in a year, you're not going to have your trademark registration in a year. So don't go ahead. There's no need to file for it.
Right. So, you're saying the geographical situation, and then if you have ambitions to grow and become more national or global, but what about, the advent of internet and online businesses? It seems like everybody is national. Everybody's, you can access everybody everywhere, and there's really no geographical scrutiny at that point. So if you are that company that is primarily online and you don't really have a local presence per se, what do you do in that instance then? What would your suggestion be?
Yeah, I think in those situations, it's probably beneficial to get that registration in place, because it's going to be harder for you to show what your geographic area really is. So as I understand it, the courts and the trademark office really aren't going to assume that just because you have a website that can be accessed nationwide or around the world that you're going to have rights to it. Really what they're looking to is, where have people placed orders from? Where have you delivered services? Where have you intentionally directed advertising? And that's going to be hard for you to kind of demonstrate to do in some of a meaningful fashion. So would you rather do that to kind of demonstrate what your rights are, or just hand over a trademark registration that says, no, I have nationwide priority to this mark? And it's a lot easier to do the latter.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so switching gears to copyright, so much content is being created, and I specifically really help the creative industry. That's where my niche is. And so I see so much content, whether it's blogs or books or courses by coaches or, photography. What are your top tips for copyright?
that's a good question, because I think copyright is a challenging one because, again, you have certain rights based off of just having created the work. More enforceable rights once you've gotten the registration. But given kind of the fluid nature of some of these works, so you talk about kind of educational courses or blog posting or any sort of written work, if they're iterating on that and changing it year over year over year, at some point in time, there's been enough changes that you need to file an additional application for that updated version. And so again, it's going to be a balancing act between getting the protection that you need for the original material and then updating that enough so that as you've made changes over time, you're still protected by what you're offering kind of 5 years down the road. So there's that as a consideration, because as you know, copyright registration is much less expensive endeavor than filing for a trademark application or filing for a patent application. So it's more manageable. But I also think the big important thing about copyright really relates back to what we were talking about before, and the ability to use the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, to have images taken down from other sites. And oftentimes, if you can demonstrate prior ownership, you don't even need a registration to do that. But again, having that registration in hand is always going to be a much more effective way to either reach out to a third-party website and say this needs to be taken down, or if you need to send out that cease and desist letter and say, no, this is actually mine.
Right. I always add to my analysis is, are you making money off of this? Is this something part of your revenue stream? And if so, you might want to just go ahead and protect it with a registration so you can have extra protection. And then you'd also be entitled to statutory protection as well once you do the registration.
Yeah, and I think the statutory protection is very important, especially for this type of content. Because so part of the analysis has to be, how likely are you to get ripped off, and what would be your recourse if you do happen to get somebody to take your material? Because having to prove that you've had fewer customers come to you because somebody else has taken your content, proving direct damage, that's really, really hard, and is very, very unlikely for many of these small companies to be able to demonstrate that they've been hurt. But being able to say, I've got a registration, I'm entitled to statutory damages, these are what those statutory damages might be, that's a much more effective way to kind of reach out and get a positive resolution.
Completely agree with that. And so we've talked a lot about protecting, and we've talked about how we can actually take them to court, essentially, if something does happen. But what are some other reasons to include the intellectual property strategy in your business?
Yeah, and so, it's important for a number of reasons. One is what we've talked about, and another is kind of as you look to take on investment. So if you've got a company that's looking to take on outside investment, part of what an investor is going to look at is, what is the value that the company has that I'm getting by this investment, and being able to point to the fact, no, I've taken care of my trademarks, I've taken care of my copyrights, I'm going through efforts to make sure other people can't take this value away from the company. That makes it much more, prime for investment from somebody else's perspective. You're showing that you're taking the right steps, and they have further assurances that, their investment is protected at least as much as it possibly can be. So there's a, I don't want to say window dressing aspect, but there's a part of making the company look appealing to outside investment. Also being able to transfer those assets, so eventually the value in your company is going to be built in part on the assets. And so as you build in, goodwill in your trademark, that's going to become valuable. And having a registration is much easier to transfer than it is to say, well, I've got some unregistered common law rights that I want to transfer over. It's going to be much easier to say, no, here's a document that says you have the right to the trademark. So it makes it much easier to transfer that value down the road.
Right. And I think that's so important. So it's protection, it is adding value to your business and to your company, making it more appealing to other investors. And plus, you can easily transfer the registrations or assign them to somebody else, which is so important, especially if somebody's trying to take over your business or you're trying to sell your business. When you were helping a company do a trademark for their business, what kind of a analysis do you do to make it aligned with their business strategy? Like, how do you align it with the way their business is running?
Clearing a trademark is certainly an art as much as anything else, because I have people come to me often and say, well, I pulled up the trademark office database. There's nothing that's identical to it. We're good to go. So let's file. And that unfortunately is not the case, because the analysis or the standard that's used is whether or not it's likely to cause confusion. So that's going to be variations in the mark, variations in the goods and services. So there's kind of a broad-based analysis that has to happen. And so part of walking through it with a company is, again, identifying risks, both regard to severity and likely to occur. So I feel like a lot of times in the conversations that we have with companies, it's like, well, here's this use, it's identical, it's a big company. If they come after you, it's going to be a big risk to the company. And since you're a very public company, your use is going to be public, the probability of them finding out about you is also going to be very high. So that's a high risk, high probability. Let's stay away from that. But then you get into kind of trickier situations where it could be a high risk. This is a mark that was used maybe 4 years ago, but I can't necessarily find an ongoing use right now, but the company's still out there. If they raise an objection, it's going to be hard to overcome. So it's, maybe a high risk, but maybe a lower probability that an objection is going to be raised. So you really have to kind of walk through those risk analyses and then say, at the end of the day, if the worst case scenario happened, this is what you would have to do. If a medium case scenario happened, this is what would happen. And in the best case scenario, you get your mark and everybody goes about their day and everybody's happy.
I love that. So I'm going to ask you a couple fun questions, just, in general. What's your favorite book, whether it's work related or not?
Okay, so that would be a vastly different answer. So kind of non-work related book, Ender's Game has always been a huge favorite of mine. I absolutely love science fiction and consume quite a bit of it, but Ender's Game has always been one of my favorite books. And then, and I feel like I have to offer some sort of professional or important sounding books here as well. I recently read The 4 Disciplines of Execution for people who are looking to formulate their goals and really execute on those goals. It was a fantastic framework to kind of think through that. So it is well worth the read because it's very kind of practical and systematic as far as how you approach these things.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. So a couple ways. You could just send me an email. My email is tschmidt, SCHMIDT.
It's right there on the bottom.
There it is. It's going to be in the notes. You could follow me on Twitter. That's at INRE, INRE Trevor. Like I said, I don't really post a whole lot, but you could probably reach out to me because I do read it. Yeah, that's probably the best ways, I would say, those 2 ways.
Awesome. Well, everything's going to be in the show notes. If someone wants to say hi, they can. And again, thank you so much for being with us. I learned so much today.
Oh, thanks, Kirja. It's been so much fun.
Thank you.